Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the BAFTA Cymru Guru Live event for Gangs of London, the Q&A. I'd like to say this at the start, before we get going, thank you very much to Sky for supporting the session and for putting this on. Thanks for joining us. My name is Stefan, and I'm going to be sort of hosting tonight, looking after you and giving you a rough idea of how things are going to work. So we've got an hour with some of the cast and the brains behind Gangs of London. And we've got about 45 minutes worth of chat with them, and also then we've got some space, some time at the end for you guys to ask some questions as well. Now, there's going to be a Q&A session, a section at the bottom of your Zoom there, so get stuck in, get those questions in to the cast. My name's Stefan, and usually I'm reading the news on Radio 1 and 1 Extra on the BBC, but when I'm not doing that, I was watching Gangs of London actually very recently. So when they asked me to come and be here tonight, I was thrilled, because you couldn't have come up with a TV show that was more up my street, because it's got gangsters, it's got violence, it's got seedy undertones, and also hard Welshmen. So it's a brilliant, perfect show for me, and lots for you watching as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Loads for us to get into. There's also closed captioning available. So if you need captions, please select the closed caption section on your Zoom and follow the live transcript in the chat. Also, there is a link in the chat if you want to see what else Sky's got coming up. There's a sizzle reel there from Sky for some of the other brilliant dramas and stuff that they've got coming up as well. So go and check that out in the chat. That's all there for you. And hopefully we'll get a chance to get around to loads of your questions at the end. But suppose let's start with the people that really matter, not me prattling on. I'd like to introduce you to Thomas, who was the executive producer on Gangs of London, to Sope as well, or Elliot, as I've known you recently, Sope, and how you made it to the end of that, I don't know, but we'll get around to that. To Gareth Evans, who's the director, and to Lauren as well, who wrote some of the fantastic work in the series, especially series episode 6 that Lauren wrote. So thank you very much all for joining us. And I suppose we should get cracking. Thomas, I'd like to ask you this first sort of broad question to begin with, but something that I was really interested in. Like I said, you know, it's a show with so many themes, so much things to get our teeth stuck into. Where did the inspiration for this series come in the first place? What's the process of making a show like this?
But that's a big question. So I'll try and answer it succinctly.
Yeah, I've gone with the big ones early, haven't we?
Well, I guess it happened quite organically. You know, we fell in love with the title Gangs of London, and I think it sparked our imagination about what we could do in redefining the genre and really kind of creating a scaled version of the London gangster genre. At first, it was a series of film, and it coincided pretty much with a time where we went to Sundance and kind of a bit like you fell in love with Gareth's work, and you know he just released The Raid, and we kind of became obsessed about that. So we got extremely excited about the possibility of approaching him to look at the idea, which, as I said, was a film first, and then yeah, really we clicked from that moment. And Gareth and Matt Flannery kind of really got behind this and created this incredible world that kind of spans genres and so on. But you know, we were so excited about the kind of Shakespearean take that one could take on this genre and so on, and redefining it. So that's kind of how it began.
What did you think, Gareth, when they first approached you and had this idea?
Well, I think what excited me about it was that obviously at that point in my career, I had always worked in Indonesia, weirdly, for a Welsh person. So most of my career existed.
Tell the story one time about you ended up in Indonesia.
I could do that. Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I've never told it before. And so what happened was like, you know, I was out there, and I guess, look, for all of the sort of like however fortuitous it was that I ended up out in Indonesia and what it did for me in terms of my career, there was always a part of me that was always wondering, I wonder if I could make it if I did it in the UK, if I pursued my career more thoroughly in the UK. And this opportunity came along to come home, so to speak, and to be able to make something on my own home soil. And, you know, it was that, what was interesting to me was that challenge of, okay, can I translate what I've sort of been developing? Because, you know, 3 films in maybe in terms of my career at that point, and a short film. So still figuring out my identity as a filmmaker and continuing to do that now. But, you know, wanting to sort of, you know, learn if there was a way to translate what I was doing there into the UK. And if so, how would it play? I remember growing up as a kid, wondering why we didn't have our version of a Die Hard. Why did we always take our sort of cop shows and our TV and our films, you know, why you had to be so grounded in reality? I wanted the escapism that I was getting from American culture, from American films. And I guess that was something that I always wanted to kind of bring to the UK at some point. And so then, you know, thankfully, Thomas and Lucas had come to me while I was in the middle of developing a project at that time, and with this gem of an idea. And, you know, for me and Matt being my longtime collaborator as a cinematographer, but also the person I send the first draft of everything I write to for his opinion, you know, I realized that we could create this thing together, that we could work on this thing together. And so, yeah, it was just a really unique opportunity that presented itself to kind of, like Thomas was saying earlier, when it was being pitched initially as a film franchise, I thought, oh, you know what, there's so much to explore about London and about the culture in London, about how diverse a city it is, that it's, you know, you could only really compare it to something like New York in respect of how many different voices and languages you hear when you're walking down a single street in London. And so I thought that that was really interesting and hadn't been properly represented within the sort of, you know, crime fiction world of what London was being represented as at that time. And so, yeah, we kind of threw it back at Lucas and Thomas and said, what if it's a TV show? What if it's long form narrative? What if it bought us the opportunity to go off and say, the first 10 minutes of episode 3 is going to be about, you know, another character. It's not going to be the A story. It's going to be another story, another character. And we can explore that person's culture, that person's story within the framework of this thing. And it just felt more natural. And thankfully, they both got behind it and you know, loved the direction with which we were taking it. And then we were able to surround ourselves with all these wonderfully talented people and bring it to the screen. About 3 years later, but yeah.
Yeah. Writing for a series that spans, you know, that distance, Lauren, and tells so many different stories of different characters. How difficult is it to make people care enough about certain characters, but also be giving, you know, face time to plenty? You know what I mean? How much of that is a challenge for you as a writer, I suppose?
Yes, you have to think about like what's happened in the episodes before and just work out the flow of like the character stories. Like in my episode 6, I knew it was very focused on the Wallaces. We didn't spend time with the Wallaces in ep 5, so it just felt naturally it was a good space to just explore their complexity a bit more.
Yeah, and I should have done this at the beginning, so apologies. But in case anybody's watching and is scared of spoilers, we are going to get into spoiler territory. So, you know, the shackles are off. Okay, we can get stuff. You know, this is, hopefully you've seen it all. If you've got the last episode to go, then you might want to think carefully about sticking with us for the rest of this chat. This is a you know, all bets are off. So you're going to find out some stuff that happens here. The Wallace is such an interesting family dynamic, such interesting characters, Lauren. What was it like getting stuck into somebody like, to characters like that?
Yeah, I mean, Marion Wallace in particular, I think leading up to episode 6, you only got like a little hint of what was going on underneath her. And in my episode, she was just unleashed, and I just really enjoyed having fun with her violence.
And Sope, when you know, you get sent scripts all the time, what made this one pop out at you when you first got it?
I tell you what, actually, like reading scripts since being sent the first episode of Gangs of London has been a problem, because it's just really hard to. It's a bit like when Mesut Ozil and Per Mertesacker won the World Cup, and then they came back to Arsenal and they were playing terribly because they'd won the World Cup, you know. They'd done the best thing that they could do in football, and then everything else was just a bit like, well, I mean, I could try, but. And reading Gangs of London episode 1 was a bit like that, in that it was just so gripping. It was so gripping, and it also promised a lot, which I hope that we've delivered over the course of the series. But as Thomas mentioned at the beginning, this like Shakespearean operatic world that Gareth and Matt had created in the script, I could feel it. I could feel it as I was reading it. So I knew straight away that I wanted to be a part of it. I've really enjoyed really expansive TV shows like Game of Thrones, and this felt in the similar world in terms of its magnitude, but also in terms of its specificity, how we like delve into each character and everyone felt whole and real rather than superficial in any sort of way. So yeah, I'm still grateful to this day that Gareth, Matt, and Tom have allowed me to jump on board this ship, because it's something that I'm really proud of.
How do you prepare for a role that's very physical, as well as, you know, Elliot's got his frailties and his emotional, you know, plenty of emotion on show, and his relationship with his father is particularly moving at times, but also it's a very physical role, isn't it, Sope? How do you prepare for that? How can you prepare for it?
It's interesting. I've always been a very physical person. Like we were talking earlier on about American football. I played American football at university. Before then, I played rugby and football. I did karate and judo when I was younger. So this job actually was a really beautiful culmination of things that I thought were separate when I was younger. Either you go off and do acting and drama at school, or you become a sportsman. And this was an opportunity to blend the two and bring out that physicality that I've always celebrated in my life so far, and bring it to work. So it was a real pleasure and a joy to do that. So I'm not sure if I needed any mental preparation, because it was something that I was looking forward to achieving. And then also, like we've all mentioned, we've watched The Raid, you know, we know what Gareth is capable of putting his actors through. And so that in itself, I'm blessed to be in a position where it wasn't daunting. It was an exciting prospect to be working on a Gareth Evans project. So yeah, but I mean, like physically, literally, we did a month or so's worth of fight choreography before we started shooting it. So I had a real sort of ease and familiarity with the choreography that we were going to try and achieve, try and put on screen. But all of that hard work had really been done well before I was a part of it, in the choreography and the previs that Gareth and his team had done before.
Lauren, had you watched Gareth's previous work, The Raid or The Raid 2 before?
I watched The Raid 1. Yeah, I knew what to expect.
and because when you're writing characters, when there's a lot of action set pieces and sequences as well, how much of that do you have to does that sort of have an impact on your ability to write for characters, or what other things you have to think about when there's obviously going to be moments of violence in the story as well?
Well, I knew in my episode there wouldn't be much action. It was more psychological, so it allowed me to just get deeper into the characters and make sure that all the violence that you saw on screen was motivated from character. But it was actually my director Xavier Gens that pushed the torture, can I just say? So.
Yeah, this would be a nice. Yeah, I want to wash my hands of that as well. Definitely. that was old Xavier.
It was a pretty brutal. Yeah, the nails was that was the moment when I was watching behind like So everybody's washing their hands of that scene. Lovely writing, Lauren, but the torture was a step too far. Now, Thomas, when you were coming up with the idea for this, obviously you talked about it originally, you wanted it to be, perhaps it was planning on being a movie. I've always been interested in this when I was watching the show. What came first for you? Was it the location? Because London is very much part of the story, isn't it? You know, the setting and some of the characters. Was it London or the style of the program, that sort of the action and the sort of the gangster epic drama? What came first, or did they both sort of come at the same time? How did that work?
So we didn't obviously create this. This is Gareth and Matt's world. I think, you know, as a producer, I guess we get interested in worlds and types and jump off points, really, and all of it was kind of together, right? The title Gangs of London was came first, and I think it was the interpretation, what that could be, the idea of, yeah, there was certain things that I think we all quite organically gravitated towards. Like Gareth said, like, you know, the multinational nature of London, right? Like so many diverse cultures and so on, but also the transversal nature of London, right? Like it's from the penthouse to the streets, and that kind of constant clash of high and low felt like a really big part of the DNA to begin with. And I feel like, you know, again, I'm curious to know what Gareth thinks, but it felt like that was the instinctive push. So There wasn't really a construct where you go, is it a location, is it a crowd? I think it was more the beginning of a lens, really, that then Gareth and Matt took and really made their own and created that and so on. So that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, because it was always Gangs of London, Gareth. It couldn't be Gangs of Swansea or Gangs of Paris. You know, it was always supposed to be London. Is that
Yeah. Yeah. You know, as much as I want to use this opportunity to kind of like show my love of Swansea, you know, when it came to it, I think like what landed it for us was this idea of like London being the sort of what felt like almost like the global capital of business and commerce. And the one thing we talked about quite a lot was this thing of like, you know, not just on the streets of London could it feel, you know, diverse and about lots of different cultures, but we wanted to play on the idea of the ripple effects of the crime and the sort of the ripple effects of somebody doing something in London could travel all the way across further into Europe or beyond, or over to America. And that was kind of like the remit. That was the sort of the initial, you know, starting off point was that our story would, you know, it might take place in London, but it would also end up having a chain, there'd be a chain of effect of things that would take us to Pakistan or take us to Kurdistan or take us to, you know, other parts of the world then in that respect. And so that was always this idea that it would be, even though it was Gangs of London, it felt like a global show then, and it would have like universal themes. And, you know, fundamentally, I mean, the most important part of it was that, you know, aside from all the sort of, you know, gangsterisms and stuff, that it was about family, and it was about people and human emotions and drama that could sit underneath all the sort of crazier, wild, sort of chaotic stuff that we were throwing at it as well.
Yeah. And tell us about this. Obviously, there's the Welsh connection is strong in the series. You're obviously probably Welsh as well. Mm-hmm. How did that sort of happen? The filming in Wales and the Welsh actors and the Welsh characters, was that always part of the plan, or did that sort of grow organically? What happened there?
Yeah, I pushed pretty quickly for that. I know, I remember when we were talking about like there'd be a Welsh traveller community. And I think a lot of people hadn't really heard that there was a Welsh traveller community and thought that it was only Irish. And we were like, no, there's a Welsh traveller community. And I'd spoken to Mark Lewis-Jones, obviously, about it. And he had done some research with Welsh travellers before. And, you know, and obviously like we're, you know, in our, you know, everything's criminal enterprise version of the representation in this show. I mean, you know, this is way heightened. This isn't like an accurate portrayal of Welsh travellers, just to be absolutely clear.
Get that in early.
Got to get that in, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, considering what Mark gets up to in the episode, definitely getting that in there. But it was important to me because it's like, you know, I'd come off the back of doing Apostle, and I'd had an amazing experience making that film, and I'd met some wonderful people. Mark being one of them, and he was just such a force of nature, and I loved working with him. And then when I was writing Kinney, I was straight away, I was like, this has to be Mark. This has to be Mark Lewis-Jones. He has to play this role, because I knew he'd crush it. And so that was, to be honest, I mean, I guess that's kind of where it came from, was this idea of, if I get Mark to play this role, it's definitely a Welsh Travellers. And then if there's Welsh Travellers, then that episode is going to go back to Wales, to like some farmhouse in the middle of North Wales. And we started seeding this stuff in. I mean, there were like one or two scenes that kind of got deleted, as they tend to do when you shoot these little, small, inconsequential scenes. But there was like, we started seeding it in episode 2. We had a sequence that got cut in the end where, when Mark is at the campsite in episode 2, there's a warning from another nearby campsite saying that the police are starting to clamp down on their communities because they're all trying to figure out where Darren is hiding. And basically, as that person turns up to warn them of it, and that, you know, that the Wallaces are kicking off, that you know, it's going to land on their doorstep soon, we had shot the kids from Evie's house delivering ammunition to them, you know, off the same truck that we then see driving back from England that arrives in Wales in episode 5. So with all these little, you know, obviously it's not there now, but, you know, it was there originally in an earlier cut of that episode where all that sort of connective tissue would exist then, you know. So it was important that I'd go back to Wales with it, definitely.
And I think, I mean, Mark's character obviously is pretty hard, but the butcher that he's a pretty hard character, isn't he? That was heck of a scene, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Like a bouncer in Port Talbot, I thought. That's in my head anyway.
Say that again.
He was like a bouncer in Port Talbot. That's what I was imagining.
Yeah, remind me never to visit. Yeah, I think my partner at the time said that this is literally the stuff of nightmares. Seeing him dressed like that or undressed like that coming at me. And I think it was definitely a scene with no acting required. I just needed to not get caught by this big man wearing very little and a meat cleaver. But yeah, I think a lot of credit should go to not only Gareth and Matt for dreaming it up, but the location and art department for creating the aesthetic of that DOS house. Because even on the days that we were shooting like Elliot's journey through the DOS house, I was just responding to what they were giving me, and they were giving me a lot of gold on the day. So yeah, it was a really intense scene for sure.
Yeah, because a lot of actors these days, I suppose, are having to react a lot to green screen or to, you know, things that aren't there. Whereas this time for you, it was very much you were reacting to what you were seeing.
Yeah, for sure. It's always better to work in environments where it can be given to you. I mean, I hope I don't sound lazy when I say that. And I think working with Lee as well, he was giving it to me. We did rehearse the scene a couple of times. He was also really like disagreeable with me for a lot of the rehearsal period because he didn't want to be like chummy and friends, so that it was all just like natural on the set. And it wasn't until afterwards where he was just like, oh, by the way, we're really good friends. I really like you. It's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm really glad you weren't trying to break my bones actually in that scene. Yeah, I mean, Lee and the art department, we had a really great production team working behind the camera who just made it a lot easier for those of us who were in front of the camera to do our jobs. So yeah, happy families.
Now, Lauren, we've touched upon your the sort of the dramatic centerpiece of your episode, but tell us a little bit about what it's like writing, because if you think, you know, traditionally the gangster genre, you don't necessarily think of two strong women, you know, in that genre of movies or television. What was it like having the chance to, you know, to shape these women, you know, in a it's very pivotal episode like the one you wrote?
Like totally exciting. I mean, that's why I was so drawn to the project to begin with when I started reading the scripts and just the female characters, and they're proactive. They don't need the men to give orders, and women doing violence is quite refreshing. So yeah, I had lots of fun writing the Marion and Tove scenes.
How do you try to make them, because it's obviously it's a heightened sense of reality. It's very, you know, out there. It's not. How do you try and make them relatable so that we as the audience sort of are engaging and either empathizing or disagreeing with what's going on in, you know, in front of you? How do you make that work?
I think it's just motivating them. Like Marion is doing what she's doing because of her family, and Tova has her children as well that she has to think of. And it's like these two women that are really protective of their loved ones, but have so much hate for each other. It just, powerful.
Yeah. And
I think when we, I was just going to say then, because what Lauren did, there was the sort of, what I felt was the masterstroke of that episode. And apologies, Lauren, I'm going to big you up massively here. But what I felt was the masterstroke was the fact that it was the complete inverse of what you would normally get in a sort of an out and out torture horror film. It was like the setup was leaning towards that, and in lesser hands, it could have become that. But I think, you know, both Lauren's work and Xavier's work in the handling of that material, the fact that you got to understand the sort of, you know, you don't have to agree with, but you can at least understand why Marion is doing what she's doing, why Tova is reacting the way she is, and what she does throughout that process. Once you understand both sides, like, you know, in the cheap version, it's like, oh, it's a victim that just screams because they're in pain, and then a masked villain that has no characteristics at all. But the fact is, we've gone on a journey with both of these people. We are understanding these people, and also we're going to see Sean learn about his mother and the depth that she's willing to go to, and then realizing that, you know what, this kid that we started with in episode 1, the first time we met him, was burning somebody off the side of a building. Hey, guess what? There's a line he won't cross. And his mother has gone to that line and jumped over it. And I think it's that thing. It was all about those character dynamics. And And I think that was what was so brilliant about that episode, and what I found so gripping about it was, you know, being able to sit back and watch it as a spectator was, you know, seeing those character dynamics play with each other throughout an episode, that, you know, that the viscera of it became just like an underscore as opposed to the real heart of the episode all in all. And I felt like, for me, the most, you know, all of the sort of the aggression aside, the most powerful moment in that whole episode was when Marion got in her car at the end of it and finally broke down and finally gave in to the stuff that she'd been repressing that whole episode, when Sean had told her, we don't need you to look after us anymore. You could just feel this, just like everything just pour out of her. And it was like, I remember watching just the rough cuts of it, you know, when it's all temp music and temp FX and stuff, and just being completely blown away. And I was like, oh, this is really special. This is a really special moment that we got here.
And Lauren, we've touched on it a little bit already, but what's the challenge as a writer who's coming in to write a pivotal episode like that? One of the sort of emotional highlights or lowlights, depending on how you look at it, of this central character. But of course, but that's your focus. Whereas, you know, in other projects, you might be in control of the entire narrative. You're taking a very specific bit and tying it with the work of other people from other episodes. What's the challenge of doing that? How do you go about trying to do that?
Well, it was quite organic in how the first 4 episodes were written before I even came on board. So I kind of knew where the story was going, who the characters were, and I knew that there was going to be Ep 5, which was a standalone. So I knew I was picking up from Ep 4, basically. And with Ep 5 being such an action-filled episode, I knew I had to slow it down and just change the form slightly, make it feel a bit weird and different after everyone's been on an adrenaline ride in Ep 5. So yeah, I didn't really struggle that much. I was just totally in the world and had a great editorial team that would just keep me up to date, little changes that were happening to episodes before me, and yeah, have to do that.
The teamwork's obviously really important on a project like this then, Thomas. Especially when somebody says, I want to make a house on the outskirts of Caerphilly and then blow it up.
Yeah. Is that for me?
What was that conversation like? That house, incidentally, is around the corner from my friends, and they said there was a house here the other day, and it's all of a sudden it's not there.
Look, it's funny because at the end of the day, like, those are the things you dream of, right? Like, you know, we are still all fanboys, and I think the idea of doing that was just super exciting. I feel like our job in a way is to put together the environment for brilliant writers, directors, and actors to really shine, and it was never really a question in a way for that. Like, that was the DNA of the show, and I think everyone understood, like Sky, HBO, who were our partners during the making of this, actually understood that this was very important. So it never felt indulgent. And I think, you know, Gareth and Matt are both very modest and humble, but like, he gave us permission to explore those things. Like, I think like people understood it wasn't Gangs of London, it was Gareth and Matt's Gangs of London. And Gareth and Matt's Gangs of London, a house does get blown up, but always with real specificity and really kind of intent and purpose dramatically. And I think that's the line that we've always have to toe, right? Is how to create those big adrenaline rushes, but then still delivering on the kind of very emotional kind of family drama and so on. And I think what Lauren did and Xavier did afterwards just made the rhythm work. And so it was I was just like a fan, man. Like, I went to set, it was awesome. It was just so cool to see those things. That's what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to not blow up the house. And truthfully, you know, Gareth and Matt are so precise as filmmakers, and it was just very, you know, very, very clear that this was needed for the show. So it never felt like an indulgence. Yeah.
And talking about, you know, that episode and throughout the series, Gareth, there's very much a blending here of your style that you've obviously learned in Indonesia and your previous work, and a sort of blend with, like you've talked about already, Western themes, the London setting, British, you know, multinational cast, but largely British for some of the, you know, key roles. How do you think that did you think that that blending of cultures would work? Were you always convinced of that?
It's sometimes you have a gut reaction to something and you think, oh, this will work or it won't work. I never really questioned it on this one. It was a weird process. It's like when I did the Raid 1, you know, I was incredibly frustrated as a filmmaker. I was kind of wanting to make something for about 2 years and couldn't get the funds for it. And then The Raid was kind of like the backup project to that. And then I just threw everything at the wall, and I was like, oh, okay, it's all set in one location because we haven't got the budget for it. It's all sort of fake, it's all going to be in this studio space. It's going to be hordes of people coming after them. And then about halfway through the writing process, I was like, oh my God, I'm writing a zombie film. But there's no zombies in it, and it's a martial arts action film. So it's not really a martial arts film. It's actually a weird sort of horror thriller element. And then once I kind of like tapped into that halfway through the writing of the script, I was like, oh, this fusion of styles will work here, because the film could become a horror film at certain moments. It could become an out-and-out action film at moments, and it could settle down for a breather for every now and then. And when it came to Gangs, then it was that thing of being able to say, being able to work with incredibly talented directors like Corin Hardy and Xavier Gens. Let's embrace genre filmmaking. Let's embrace what we love about genre filmmaking, which is that fusion of genres, that idea of, it can start off as a drama, but then turn into a thriller, or turn into a horror, or turn into an action film. It can have romantic interludes in there, and all of these things can exist in our show. So once we knew that all of those sort of genres could be ticked off in any one episode, when you compare episode 1, the pub fight is like a roller coaster ride. It's an adrenaline rush. It's fun. Knock about, and we get to run through it the same way that Elliot runs through that pub. But then when you get to the Len fight, when a pair of wellies is attacking Elliot, it becomes a horror film all of a sudden, and it becomes oppressive, and we shot it differently. We crushed the tone down a little bit more, and we were able to build into that tension, build into that thriller element. And so, it never really kind of crossed my mind that it wouldn't work. It just felt like the right thing to do. And it was always about, with all of the writing, regardless of wherever we are in an episode, there was never a moment where we would say, oh, it's page 10, throw an action scene in. Everything had to feel organic. Everything had to kind of exist because it was the right time for it to happen. And if it hadn't been set up in the same way that in an action sequence, when we're designing it, that we build to these little big punchline moments, these little crescendo moments within the action, it's the same for drama. And if you don't build up to that peak of drama, then or that peak of conflict, then it's not the right time to have it peak. You got to build to it at all times. And so that was the same thing across every episode of the show then. And it was like, all right, well, where do the genres meld? Where do they meet in the middle? Where do we get to that moment where it just takes off, and it's different episode by episode then? Yeah.
And talking of that pub fight scene where we first meet Elliot Sope, it's an interesting introduction to the character, isn't it? It's like it's straight away from the beginning. What was it like trying to get under the skin of him as a character? How did you try to get into, or is that your method? Do you like to get into the mind of the character? How do you do it? And how did you do it in this instance?
Well, I mean, spoiler alert, we've done it already. But because Elliot is undercover, there is a duality to him that I thought was a bit more specific than a lot of other characters that I have played or will play. There's almost like 2 characters to create rather than just one. And then you also have to plot when he's Elliot Finch and when he's Elliot Carter, and if there's any slippage between the two, how he catches himself doing that. So, I mean, but in terms of getting on the skin of the character, especially in that first sequence, it tells us a lot about who he was before that point. The fact that he moves through the pub so efficiently and like is cutting people down like, I don't know, corn or something. That was a really bad analogy.
I can visualize it.
Not going to work on your analogies. I was following you. I was following you. It's fine.
It's all right, Chopes. It's not going out live.
Oh, man,
do a redo on it.
Not loads of people watching. It's fine.
But yeah, it told me as an actor playing the character, and hopefully it told our audience a lot about his history, how he'd been in the army, and his history and relationship with violence. There's a lot that we can learn from that first sequence as well as enjoy. But as an actor getting into that character, it told me a lot about what he was willing to do. And Gareth and I discussed also how he's a bit like a bull. And once he's heading in one direction, or like a locomotive train, for example, once he's heading in a direction, he's going through any obstacle that's in his way to get there. And then you'll find obstacles like Cole in episode 3 who are a bit too immovable, and he's the one that has to bend. But it tells us a lot about his attitude into missions, or his loyalty or his dedication to work. So what I really love about Gareth's work as well is that in the violence, there is so much story. None of it is ever meaningless. None of it is ever frivolous, or like you said, just throw it in because it's page 10. There's a lot of story in those sequences. And I hope, whilst the pub scene is definitely a bit more of a Western cowboy, enjoyable, slapdash sort of fight, there's still so much there, so much richness in it that I hope we convey to our audience and then just keep for ourselves.
And how long did it take you to practice? Because, like you say, it's very specific movements and a very specific choreography. How long does it take to do an action scene like that as a performer? How long does it take you to learn the choreography?
I suppose, like I mentioned earlier, that we rehearsed the fight sequences, but it wasn't just the pub scene. It was the pub sequence and the coal fight in episode 3. We rehearsed them for about a month before we started principal photography. But that doesn't mean it takes a month to learn, I suppose. I think there was an element of drilling it to the point where you could do it backwards, so that not only was it safe and it would be quick to shoot, but also knowing it to the point where I'm not performing it on the day and just like, oh, and then I step here, and knowing it so that my foot will go there automatically so that I can do my acting on top of the choreography, you know? But a lot of credit has to go to Men's Sana Tamakloe, who was my stunt double, and Chris Webb and Jude Poyer. I think it was quite a quick process working with them on this. And a lot of that rehearsal time went to, I remember turning up some days and be like, do we have to do it again? I mean, I definitely know it, you know? But doing it again and drilling it and rehearsing it gave us the sequence that we've got on screen. I would love to say to Gareth, oh yeah, I'll learn the whole sequence in 3 days and it'd be great, but maybe it wouldn't be as good as the sequences were in the series.
Yeah. Well, look, we've had loads of questions coming in from people watching, so we're going to get to them really soon because there's tons of good questions coming in. But before we do that, just to finish up, Thomas, there's obviously an overarching plot here. When you and Gareth were discussing this in the beginning, obviously it went from a movie to a series to, you know, is there, it's obviously got scope for more. Is that always the plan, or was it open-ended just to see how it happens, or what was the decision or the thinking behind that?
Gareth, do you want to take it? Like, I guess from our point of view, was always to create something that had the potential to explore a lot, and therefore, yes, you know, it didn't feel like a limited series as such, where the end was the end. So, but I don't know if it was decision. I think we always liked it and gravitated towards a kind of complex and dense story with characters, and therefore, yes, you always feel that long form television allows you to explore those things. But I don't know, I'm not a believer of like over plotting what happens on season 5 and so on. Actually, just make an amazing first season that has amazing characters, and I think that will tell you where you can go. But I don't know, Gareth, you know, that's probably more for you, mate.
Yeah, I mean, it's always an evolving process. I mean, like, storylines change as you develop them, and you know, you find, you know, when we were shooting things, we would even evolve on the day of filming certain sequences. Like, I mean, I remember, you know, having conversations with Michelle, who played Marion, and Lucien, who played Ed. We had a whole sequence where I'm not sure if the scene ended up making it in the final cut in the end, but like, we would have discussions about scenes that maybe, you know, in the early draft of a script, it was potentially probably trying to do too much expositional lifting. And so then we would sit down and we'd be open and honest with each other. And I just say to both Michelle and Lucien, I said, like, does any of these lines of dialogue feel like complete bullshit to you? Is there anything here which feels like that you can't make it feel real, that it just doesn't, like, that it just feels unnatural, you know? And then, you know, obviously they would definitely say if it was that case. And, you know, that was the environment that I like to kind of nurture on the set, was to be able to explore and go through it. Because, you know, the reality is that it takes hearing stuff to be spoken. It takes hearing lines that to get spoken back at you to identify the stuff that really works, and then the stuff that is a bit mealy mouthed or clunky. And so it's a constantly evolving process. The one thing I do know, and I do remember very specifically, though, when we were developing it, Thomas, was this idea of I remember thinking at the start where it was like, because the first season of Gangs was all about the Wallaces, that I remember there was an excitement to the idea of, oh, because we knew where we were going with the end of season 1. Spoil the time again. Sean gets shot in the face, and so so there we go. I quite enjoyed saying that. But it's like, but our goal was, our thing was, I remember talking very early on in the development process where I was like, this is like the geeky version, but like, you'd see a billboard for what Gangs of London was, and it'll be the Wallaces and Elliot and the Dumanis, and then we were like, season 2 would be just Elliot and the Dumanis. You know what I mean? You just kind of like, that was sort of like the exciting thing. Like, oh, imagine that for season 2. That's the poster. You know what I mean? And so, obviously, some of those ideas were there, and they kind of like percolate in the back of your brain, so to speak, but like never to the point where it's like, oh, and then in episode 4 of season 2 and episode 6 in season 4, never that far. It was just always a case of what's exciting in the now of it all, and then seeing where those characters would take us, and to be honest, where the actors would bring more to those roles than we had put on the page, and fleshing them out and making them feel real, and then starting to realize, oh, you know what, there's something really interesting here with the character dynamics, and that'll have a knock-on effect and change things as the story progresses.
I knew there was something sinister bubbling in the background when Tim McInnery, I read that he was popping up in it. I was like, oh, he's going to be a sinister. I've got a feeling that Tim's going to be a sinister little something in the background. And what Gareth was talking there, Lauren, about sort of hearing your lines coming back at you, when you've written something down for actors. When, in your episode, when you started hearing those lines being delivered, was there some revision and some tweaking, or were you sort of set and everybody sort of stuck with it?
Yeah, I think once like Marion Wallace and Ed Damani started saying there was tweaks on the set, which I was happy. It made the scenes better. So I'm not very precious over my.
Yes, you're not precious. You're not like, no. I've written it like this. It must be delivered like this. No, well, listen, we've got loads of questions coming in, so let's get straight to it. Now, first question, straight to you, Thomas. It's the one that lots of people are asking. Can we expect a new season in 2022? Cut to the chase.
Can we expect what? Next season?
Can we expect a new season in 2022?
Potentially, yeah.
Good. Yeah, we have an answer. I
don't understand. He's thinking about it.
He's thinking about it.
Bad line. I can't really understand what you're saying. No, I'm only joking.
You're breaking up.
Yeah.
And then so many brilliant questions. Let's see. And that was from Leah. So thank you very much for getting for your question, Leah. And we touched upon this, but Lauren, let's sort of maybe expand on it a little bit more. Leah's also asking about the female characters in the show and how they change. Was it interesting, sort of and we've talked a little bit about it, but just to have carte blanche to write women that I haven't seen female characters like this on television before, so that must have been really refreshing.
And I think, like I say, it was the episode where Marion Wallace was unleashed, and it just kind of like the journey that she takes for the rest of the series in terms of just getting the Damanis out and assuming control in a way. It was exciting, right?
A question for you here, Sope, now, because we know that the spoiler shackles are off. How did you feel about Sean getting shot in the face? Because your character spent a lot of time with him, lying to his face most of it. Spent a lot of time, performing together, but also your characters, have been on this journey together. What does it feel like? Do you see that's happened?
It was quite saucy to deliver the ultimate betrayal. I've just seen a TV series called La Révolution, which is a French series. It's on Netflix at the moment. And there is a similar sort of twist in the last episode. And I was just like, how could you? So now I understand how everyone else felt about Elliot shooting Sean in the face. Like, yeah, at the time I relished it, but now I'm just like, oh, I could get why people are upset now.
Sope, you need to watch The Shield, mate. Every single season. Every single season. You're like, how could you? How could you? How could you?
Okay,
I just binged all 80 episodes in the last sort of 10 weeks. So it was incredible.
Okay, sure. Looking forward to more pearl clutching moments.
Yeah.
Richard's asking Gareth to expand this notion of the Shakespearean drama that you were inspired by to write, because there's a lot of sort of these characters here. They do sort of, you can trace sort of the inspiration back to Shakespeare. But could you expand a little bit more on that for Richard?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I mean, when we use the term like Shakespearean and stuff, it gets bandied about a lot, you know, and usually it's with respect of sort of, you know, familiar dramas about, you know, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. And for us, it was all about like the idea of the son inheriting the sins of his father, and you know, the idea of the hero worship, and it tends to kind of also be, when we talk about it in terms of big operatic moments, and those don't have to be sort of like, you know, action set pieces, but big operatic moments of emotion, of conflict and drama, and that tends to be the sort of the tone of the show. Then we weren't looking for something that was going to be, you know, quiet moments of introspection throughout the show. You know, there would be the odd opportunity for that, but you know, it was about those big moments of conflict, as you know, Alex realizes just how much Ed has been hiding from him, as Sean realizes that everything that, you know, that pedestal that he put his father on was built upon lies, and you know, I mean, all of those like big, heavy sort of, you know, familiar drama moments were you know, quote unquote Shakespearean and operatic and big.
Yeah. And was that something you sort of had in the back of your mind, Lauren, when you were writing your episode, that sort of the interplay of the characters and that sort of that tale that you were telling?
I mean, you can't get as Shakespearean as torture and just like in a room. Well, I knew that the house would, in a way, become its own character as well, which is could be quite Shakespearean, I guess. And yeah, I just lent into it.
Yeah. And as a producer, Thomas, is it when you're chatting with Gareth early on about the project, and he drops you know, he says, I want it to be Shakespearean, does that fill you with dread, or does that actually make you think, yeah, no, great? Do you know what I mean? How does it impact your thoughts on a project at all? Especially because, you know, a modern something like this is very modern, but also blending that sort of those traditional themes that we've known for years.
I definitely don't think dread. I think we aligned quite early on in terms of the ambition and the sense, you know, I think Gareth taught us a lot, I think, in there, and give us permission to take those bold moves. But there's one thing that I always remember is that idea of feeling dangerous. The series, it needs to feel dangerous at every time. And dangerous, as we just discussed, is not from big kind of set pieces necessarily, but just the kind of weight of the emotion and the danger that people are put through. So I think we aligned quite early on that. And I think this was part of the DNA of the show, like this idea of layering, I guess, the story and the characters, but rooting it in kind of very, very big emotions of family betrayal, shame, all of those things. I think were very much part of the beginning. It wasn't an artifact in a way. I think kind of we set out, and I think we connected quite quickly on the overall scope and idea of the show. So no dread. Maybe yeah. I'm masochistic and I like it, so I don't know.
Now, a question for you, Sope, from Leila here. Was there any moment where you doubted yourself in the middle of this project? It's quite a deep question, Leila. Very psychological. Yeah. You know, and how did you get past it?
Okay. I'll tell you what, like right at the beginning, you know, for all of the excitement of being a part of a Gareth Evans project, or a part of something as expansive, and all the things that I said that I loved about this series at the beginning, that was definitely a big motivating factor in wanting to be a part of it. But then when they say, okay, yeah, we want you to do it, you're just like, yeah, but can I do it? You know, there are all these soft doubt creeps in. I'm sure it creeps in at every level of the, Gareth may not be willing to admit to it, but I'm sure there was an element of, this is unknown territory. It certainly was for me. I've never been the lead of a TV series before. And to think of all of everything that comes with that, you know, it was, I definitely doubted myself at the beginning. And I suppose there are two ways I got over it. One is working really hard. Every time I've doubted myself in my career beforehand, for example, when I did Coriolanus at the RSC, I had the RSC on this massive pedestal. Like the whole of my life, I'd wanted to be a part of that company. And when they gave me the opportunity to lead a show there, I was just like, can I do it? So I just threw myself into this really crazily obsessive amount of detail and how I was building my character. And I found a similar sort of headspace with building Elliot for Gangs of London. And then also is to be surrounded, which isn't always a choice that you have as an artist, but I was really lucky that that was the case on this project, is to be surrounded by people who not only are really good at their jobs, but are really great people, you know, and made lots of really great friends on this job, both in production and in the cast. And like knowing that you're going through it all together stops you needing this pretense of like, oh, I've got it on lock, everything's gonna be great. You know, being able to turn to Gareth and say like, hey, I'm thinking this, what do you think? And sharing the load, basically, not feeling like I'm an island that has to be right all the time and needs to know all the answers. Being able to turn to the people that you're working with and be like, hey, I'm not too sure about this, what do you think? And getting responses back that are really positive and being like, oh, well, I'm working out as well, or I think this, you know. So hard work and surrounding yourself with really good people, I think, are the best ways to get over self-doubt.
And I suppose it is quite brave, isn't it, to show that vulnerability on a project like this. And you say, actually, I'm not sure about this. What do you think? You know, because often we always think that you have to have the answers all the time.
Yeah, and the environment for that has to be created, you know, and that starts at the top with Thomas and Lucas and Gareth and Matt. If they don't create the environment in which people feel safe to be like, hey, I'm not so sure, people will not open up, everyone will clam up. So massive thanks to the guys at the top.
A question for you, Gareth, from Alana. She wants to know, what was the biggest struggle for you during the pre-production and the script writing phase? What was the bit you struggled with the most?
Oh God, all of it. It's
you had to work with, eh?
It was a massive undertaking, you know what I mean? And it was, we were very fortunate to have a room full of incredibly talented people to kind of bounce ideas off. And, you know, talking to what Sope said earlier about how, you know, as a performer, you would, you know, feel comfortable within a space to be able to, you know, ask a question here and there. It was the same kind of thing when we were doing the sort of the writer's room stage of things. We were kind of, you know, open to the idea of like everyone pitching an idea. It doesn't matter if you're not 100% sure of it, because even if the idea wasn't the right one, it might springboard us off into the next one. And so the hardest part for us was like getting it all on the wall first, because like we were like, and you know, when it starts from a seed of an idea, it can go in so many different directions. One of the things that myself and Matt did very, very early on before we jumped into the room is we started making a family tree for each of the organizations, what their relationships were with each other, what were their experiences, what was their areas of interest in terms of business, whether that was to do with drugs or other certain vices. And then we would look for where the crossover would exist between the different gangs and the different groups of people, and what the food chain looked like, and where we could create conflict within all of those little stories that would run parallel with each other. And that really helped us crystallize then what the show needed to be. It really helped us figure out, this is the journey of this character and that character. And I guess it was just an ongoing process, really, of just being like, okay, what's Elliot's story? What could Elliot's story be over the course of this season? And figure out roughly what his season arc was going to be. And that had the flexibility to evolve, obviously, in a period of time. Then you do the same for Sean, do the same for Marion, do the same for all your key characters, your key players, and figure out where do we need to dip into them on an episode by episode basis. And then, you know, you end up at the end of God knows how many months we spent doing it, with like a 360 around the walls of this room, where it was like, that's episode 1, that's episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then you've got all these bullet points of things that, are going to evolve and change the more and more you develop each episode individually, and how they would feed forwards and backwards into each other. So there'd be certain moments where we'd be doing something in episode 1, and then there'd be a pivotal moment in ep 3 maybe that suddenly would need it to be seeded in ep 1. So then we'd be like, oh, we need to see that now. We need to have a scene that puts that in play. So yeah, it was balancing all of those storylines and knowing what was the right balance for the first episode in particular, to tee up all those characters, to tee up that world, because we needed to kind of say, well, here's everyone. we're going to spend a little bit of time with some of them, but there's the potential there for them to mushroom out into their own world and their own story in for future episodes. But it was just knowing the right amount of detail and the right amount of information that the audience would need to be able to still be, interested in, who's Lala? What makes her so interesting? Why do I want to know more about that character? And the same with Ollie, who played Luan, and so forth, and just finding all the right little intriguing moments in F1. At least that was the hardest challenge for us.
Bit more complicated than doing a standalone movie, is what you're saying.
Oh, just a tad, yeah, a little bit.
Now, I'm just aware of the time. We've only got 5 minutes left, so I'd like if try to get around everybody so we can just give shorter answers for this last little bit, if that's okay with everybody. There's a question for you, Lauren, from Josh here about the research that you as a writer would undertake if you're writing your episode is very specific about these, the relationship between these two women and that very famous torture scene that we've already talked about that we're going to breeze past because the thought of the nails is making me queasy. But with the broader theme of sort of gangsters and dodgy undertones in London, how much research into that sort of world do you do to get a sense of where these characters might be coming from and that sort of thing, or do you actually just write for the people in front of you?
Well, luckily they had researchers on before I even came on, so I had this lovely document where all that research was there, and I would just return to it whenever I was looking at Lale's community and stuff. I could look at the PKK research and just build on that. But I had to do my own research in terms of torture techniques. So I think I'm on the watch list.
She's burnt her laptop since then, obviously.
Imagine somebody walked in and you there. What are you doing? I'm just researching some torture techniques. A question for you, for Sope and Gareth here from Jules. Gareth, how much influence did you have on the fight choreography? And in Sope, how much could you suggest ideas yourself? Oh, actually, we've been training it for months like this, but how about if I did it like this as well? Or would you leave that up to the experts? If we start with you, Sope, then come to you, Gareth.
I was going to say, there is a lot of leaving that up to the experts. So this is a Gareth question for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, Gareth, how much did you get involved then in those fight sequences?
I mean, I don't have a martial arts background, other than being a spectator of it and loving watching movies from that genre. So, what I write on the script is very, very brief. It's like 2 paragraphs, usually 3 paragraphs, just to kind of give a sense of placement, location, props that might get used, and the tone of the thing on a psychological level. Then it's briefing that to Jude Poyer and his stunt team, including Chris and all the rest of the guys, and just kind of leaving them alone for 2-3 hours and just going right, I'll come back in 2-3 hours, show me what you got. And then they'll usually present me with a bunch of really amazing, intricate methods for how to hurt people. And so then my involvement then comes from a place of looking at all of that stuff and looking to try to shape the structure of the sequence with them and start looking for those bits where it needs to increase the pace or the energy and get to those punchlines I talked about earlier. So that, I might say to them I want to use a glass ashtray here. I want to use a playing dart here. But then they will figure out little bits of how we might use that. And I'm going to quickly, because I think Sope won't answer seriously or genuinely, and he'll kind of you'll say, it was all them. But there were moments in the pub fight, and me and Chris and Jude always talk about this, when one of the guys goes to grab his shoulder, Sope just instinctively did almost like a boxer's move where he just pulled his shoulder away in order to kind of then slam the dart between the webbing of the fingers. That was all Sope. And there's little things. It's the same way with dialogue. I might write something and then workshop it with the actors to get it to feel real to them. It's the same with the choreography too. So the performer has to be able to make the movement feel real to them too. So there is a certain amount of adaptability, and then Sope can carry on and finish the answer.
Yeah, okay. One move in the whole 9 Fs. I put in.
But what a move!
Well, listen, our time is pretty much done. So just to finish off, last question, quick answer, Thomas, if you don't mind. As the executive producer of Series 1, looking to the future of this project, what's the big challenge for you now, looking ahead? Putting it all together, helping pull it all together.
I think it's just continue to strive for excellence and I think for us specifically is the tone. I think what we've discussed here is, the special thing about Gangs is it subverts a lot of genres and kind of has a lot packed into it. So just landing that right, where do we elevate, where do we stay grounded? But again, the one thing I would say, and I think you've heard it from all of us, the one thing this show has is just an incredible team. Like, just, I can't emphasize enough, like, the cast is unbelievable. Like, the writers, like the directors, the heads of department. Like, I think that's what is our, not insurance guarantee, but that's what we can rely on. But I think our collective goal is to just get it right tonally, which I think first season did it. I just hope that we can continue to innovate and elevate while maintaining that.
Yeah, well, Thomas, Gareth, Lauren, and Sope, thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating listening to you. I could go on for hours more. I think I might actually go back and have to rewatch it now because I want to see that. I want to see that move that Sope did with his shoulder. To go back and watch it. And also, thank you very much for all your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get onto all of them. There are loads of questions come in. They were brilliant questions. So thanks for joining. And remember, this is part of BAFTA Cymru's Guru Live series, and there's loads more of these events going on throughout November. So check out BAFTA's website for details of the event. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to Sky for supporting the event. Thanks to you guys for all your insights. It's been lovely to chat to you all. And thank you to everybody who's been messaging us. Go back and watch it again. And looking forward to whatever. Just to let you know, if you do need a new hard man Welsh character, then clearly,
yeah.
Or a Welsh news, newsreader, fine, but Welsh hard man. I'm just saying, I'm here, I've got time, just give me a call, Gar,
Newsreader by day, hard man by night.
Yeah. Newsreader by day, hard man gangster by night. I can pull it off. But yeah, just give me a call after this if you want. I've got a
perfect.
I'll speak to you then. Great, lovely. Thank you everybody for your time. It's been lovely to chat to you, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.